you have the sort of short the banker, long Bitcoin mentality, but then they also make the number go up. So we cheer them. But for your average person, say in Venezuela or Lebanon or Iran, who cares about Bitcoin, they don't want Wall Street and institutions here, right? They want to use Bitcoin as money or a store of value.
I think it's a little bit more nuanced in that like we're not saying like the bankers are here, which I'm sure they are coming in. Well, they definitely are. They are. It's actually really interesting. I'll get to that later. But like what I'm saying is the smart guys, it's the rocket scientists that trained to put, rockets into space, being hired up by some quant firm to build, some front-running software to beat the market. And then they're coming over to crypto to go, wow, it's inefficient. Let's build some stuff to make it efficient. It's not like the chairman of Goldman Sachs is coming in to do that, because those guys come in and they want to dominate and control the currency. These guys are coming in to build cool stuff to add to the ecosystem. And ultimately, I think I don't think I've come across anyone who doesn't really, like, after working with it, really believe in the ethos of it. And usually in a much more sophisticated way. So, like, you look at SBF over at FTX, right? He's exactly that. What I'm talking about, like a little bit of Wall Street background, and coming over, like, whoa, look at all this stuff. Let's build some cool shit. Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, you got the bankers coming over, and they're coming over in a really interesting rock and a hard place, because they make commercial and retail banks make money by essentially propagating debt and expanding the money supply, through their process of loaning out and then getting deposits and loaning out, and they expand the money supply. And effectively, the central bank goes down through this food chain, and now with central banks effectively saying, we're cutting you guys out, we're going to issue our own currency, central bank digital currencies. The retail and commercial banks are now faced with two things that they can do. Option one is to roll over and die, and option two is to be a Bitcoin bank, right? Essentially be on the other side of the divide, because really it's coming down to central bank digital currencies and free and open peer-to-peer currency. And so you can see one by one, what is it? DBS Singapore's banking Bitcoin. Standard Charter, I think, is initiating something in Europe. Morgan Stanley moving, JP Morgan. And it's like they're all coming over to Bitcoin, and they don't have a choice. So that's the interesting thing, is on that side of things, those guys are coming into Bitcoin with I think their tails tucked, because they're forced to. With the valuations now no better than Coinbase, right? Yeah. And SBF now, like, I don't know if he was joking or was being serious, but it's like, it's not out of the question to acquire Goldman Sachs. Like,
or
it gives
CME.
You a little, well, and the CME, right? It gives you a little bit of a completely flip side thing. We're not that small anymore. Definitely not at the current growth rates.
How big of a smile did it put on your face when you read that? Because to me, that was the funniest and most amazing news story in ages. Just the fact that, the thing is, he means it.
Yeah, right. It's backed by data. It's backed by the growth rate, right? Like, this thing's going to, it's going to 100 trillion, if not more. I imagine the economy is going to get a lot bigger, just because productivity is improving. So yeah, like this is probably a 10x above what banks, the size of the scale of banks, So yeah, we're so used to 12 years of being the little guys, but now we're in this zone of breaking out of being little to becoming mainstream. And you can tell that because the chairman of central banks are now fudding Bitcoin.
They're talking about it. Regardless of what they're saying, the very fact that they're talking about it is astounding.
It's like the very largest banking powers in the world are now scared of this little thing that we thought was a toy a few years ago. So it really is, and it's like it's what is it? It's roughly 160 million people have exposure to Bitcoin today, but that doubles every year. So it's not actually about the size we are in, but it's the growth rate, and the current network growth rate is the fastest growth rate of any technology we've ever seen in the history of mankind, which means that we'll be at saturation within a decade.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, I'm kind of wondering how long will it take for central bank digital currencies to actually roll out and be ready, because they've got a race on their hands. If they can't get this done in 5 years,
it's over. Yeah, they've lost.
It's the crypto is de facto. Bitcoin is de facto. It's too late.
I agree.
They really only got a window of probably, I don't know, 2
3
years.
to 5 years. Yeah, maybe 2. Yeah, I think you're right. I think China's going to roll out, but the others are going to be very slow.
Yeah, China's going to be it's going to be quite a closed. I imagine it'd be quite closed because how they do it, they'll be the fastest. They'll be the fastest. But
easy to be fast when you have complete control over what you're building and don't have to ask anyone else's opinion. It's so funny though, talking about what you mentioned with SBF. I had Steven Stoneberg from Bittrex Global on the show, and he said, it used to be like the bankers were the rich guys. And then in like the 70s, 80s, whatever, the hedge fund guys came in. They're like, haha, you're $1 billion. I've got $2 billion. Like, we're the rich guys. And now you have 28-year-olds who are worth 10 or 20 billion and just completely, right? So the future of wealth is going to move to the crypto billionaires.
Yeah,
I mean, and they're going to be 20, 30 years younger than the guys who made their money on Wall Street.
And this is the interesting thing is like, the founding fathers of America were essentially millennials when they wrote the founding documents, right? And I mean, there's been cases like this in Europe. I think, is it Estonia? I think is one of these countries where it was like the average age of the politicians was in their 30s. Like a lot of progress happens when the younger generation get to rewrite the rules according to the changing times. And like what's interesting now is the new power that's rising as, the millennial generation, but the cream of the crop are making billions in crypto right now.
Yeah.
And they have very fine understanding of how monetary markets work. So I see a huge power change, right now. It's like, if you ever read the book, The Fourth Turning, it really describes every 4 generations. They go through archetypal kind of changes, and every fourth turning, last one was the Great Depression going into World War II, and we had a major shift of regime and infrastructure change. All the strong institutions we were built in present day was built then with high integrity, and now they've been dismantled. And we're actually in that fourth turning, in the fourth generation of that happening now. And it's the millennial generation that are now very capitalized with the ones that are capitalized, like SPF. We're very, it's new values. It's going to be a really interesting time in the next 10 years. I think it's ridiculous amounts of change we're going to have. And I think it's going to be positive. I'm not doom or gloom. Might be a bit of pain in the short term, but I think it's positive.
Is. So you talk about this thing going to 100 trillion, right? So what does that mean for Bitcoin price?
Yeah, per Bitcoin, right?
Right, yeah, $100 trillion per Bitcoin, obviously. If anybody's listening, Willy Woo has just predicted $100 trillion Bitcoin. Just so you guys hear.
It's possible if USD goes to zero.
But reasonably, cycle tops, is there a last cycle? Does it eventually just become a stable asset, because it's a standard? Where's this thing going in your mind? I'm
more and more siding on the last cycle. You can even see it on the chart. It's a drunken walk right now of demand and supply. We've had parabolic rises and a blow-off top in 4-year cycles for 3 times now. And this time we're doing these kind of weird drunken walks of demand and supply as different participants come in and different effects happen. And so I'm kind of like with Michael Saylor, which he said to Laura Shin, there is no top, Laura. I think we might just not have these 4-year cycles because they're predicated on a supply shock from the halvening. You know, every 4 years, the sell pressure from miners halves, and the sell pressure from miners is getting pretty small now. We're at 1.7% inflation rate per year from miners, and the next halvening goes from 1.7 to like 0.8% or something like that. That's infinitesimal in a supply shock when exchanges are already almost double that. Like the sell pressure from exchanges, if they were to sell all of their fees revenue into fiat, not saying they do, but they do sell some of it. The potential for their sell pressure is 2 times what miners do. The sell pressure from Grayscale's ETF, well, it's not an ETF, but their fee management fees of 2% is about 5% of all the miners combined right now. So as ETFs start to climb, their sell pressure comes in. So there's all these kind of mature market like demand supply impacts that are really starting to reduce what impacts miners have, which is what the 4-year cycles is predicated on. So I think we're now in the last cycle, and you know, some people say, oh, we're getting lengthening cycles. No, it's just like we've just made a binary shift from 4-year cycles into correlations in demand and supply to macro markets.
But it's funny when you say the last cycle, I think your average person, the first thing is going to be like, oh my God, that's bearish. Like, this is it. It just went up and we're done. But I think the point is that it will just continue to rise, and even a 50% correction will be more temporary, and we don't have to wait 4 years to start going up again.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. I mean, I like the last cycle. It's so dramatic, you know, but you might use Dan Howard's super cycle. I mean, that sounds like we might skip a cycle, but I think it's like the cycles that ended, and now we're just, the only way is up through a drunken wander.
So just to conclude, Willy Woo says that 1 Bitcoin will be worth a few $100 trillion, and that we're in a super cycle that never ends. I got it. Perfect. I love it. No, but I know that that doesn't mean that Bitcoin is going to a couple $100 trillion, but it's always good to get a joking soundbite. So I know that we're up against it here with time. Where can everybody?
It's good to get a headline, right?